Hi, my name is Maya. I'm a college counselor, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about college lists. By the end of the summer before your senior year, you want to have put together your college list, which is a list of colleges you're planning to apply to. You don't want to wait until last minute to make your college list. Having a good list is very central to having a positive application experience, and you want to plan out your list carefully and research colleges. I find that when students are unhappy with their application outcomes, it most often stems from a problem with their college list. So there are basically two sides to this whole thing of creating a college list. On one side, researching colleges and figuring out what you like and where you want to go. On the other side, creating the actual list. So figuring out which colleges you're likely to get into, and then making sure your list is balanced in terms of difficulty of getting in, or selectivity. You'll also want to decide on how many colleges to apply to. A lot of resources conflate these two things, but to me, researching colleges and then balancing the list are really two different topics. This video is going to be focusing on the second part, how to make the list itself. But before you are ready to make the list, you should be doing lots and lots of college research. All of the colleges on your list should be colleges that you have researched and definitely would be happy to attend. Research is always the first step to making a college list. For more information on how to research and what to look for as you research, you should watch my college research video, which I am still making that video. But when it's ready, it will be up here, and if you are subscribed, you will get a notification. So let's talk about how to put together that list. The first question you might have is, how many colleges should be on my list? This answer is different for everyone. I usually say around 8 to 12 colleges. Why 8 to 12? Generally, college counselors agree on around 10 as being the optimal number between making sure that you have options, but also not just being an insane amount of work. That said, most of my students apply to more than 10. This usually happens because I work with many students who apply to the UCs, both in-state and out-of-state, and all the UCs have the same application. So they end up applying to a bunch of them just to see which ones they'll get into. The basic reason to apply to at least 8 or 10 is because of the unpredictability in the admissions process. For the most part, admission to any given college is not guaranteed. So you want to make sure that you're applying to enough that you get into a few colleges that you like, especially if you want to be able to compare financial aid offers. So why not just apply to like 30? Well, mainly because it can be a crazy amount of work. Many colleges are going to ask you to write an essay about why you want to attend that college, and often other essays as well. There's a point where the workload and amount of writing that you have to do is just going to become unmanageable, and your essays are probably not going to be as good if you're rushing through them. It also costs money to apply to colleges, usually somewhere between $40 and $90 per college. You might be able to get fee waivers, especially if you're low income, but this still can add up to a lot of money. Some students do choose to apply to a lot of colleges, and if I'm working with a student who really wants to do that, I don't ever really tell them no. But with a well-planned list, I wouldn't really recommend more than about 15 max. At very least, you should come up with a well-balanced starting list of around 10, and then once you've completed those apps, add more if you still have time and energy. Do you need to apply to 10? No. You might want to apply to fewer if you have a likely or safety that you're really genuinely happy to go to and you just want to apply to a few reach schools. You have strict restrictions on where you're applying. For example, you definitely don't want to leave the city where you currently live. And also, if you're not concerned with being able to compare financial aid offers. So you're confident that your family can afford the college that is your safety. I have worked with students who have only applied to 3 colleges because they had a safety that they were happy to attend, and they just wanted help on a couple extra apps. We have kind of a college prep culture that sets an expectation of applying to lots of colleges, but that's not something you actually have to do if that's not what you want. Don't apply to 10 colleges just because your friends are doing it and you feel like you should. However, if you are only applying to a few colleges, you need to make sure that you are realistically looking at how likely you are to get in. If I have a student who says they just want to apply to a few Ivies and that's it doesn't matter how amazing their application is. Those colleges are just too selective to be the only schools on someone's list. This is a very important point to understand about college admissions. For any given college, even if you are a really good candidate, you cannot assume that you will get in. And this brings us to our next topic, selectivity. If you've been learning about the college admissions process, you'll be familiar with the idea of safety, target, dream schools, stuff like that. This is all about understanding selectivity. If you're putting together a list of 10 colleges, you want to make sure that all 10 are colleges that you would be happy to attend, and then balance out the list in terms of selectivity. That means having the right number of safety, target, and reach colleges. Let's talk a little more about these terms. A safety is a college that you're very certain you will get into. For example, a state college that guarantees admission to students with a certain GPA and class rank. It also could be a college that has a high admissions rate and where your GPA and test scores are significantly higher than those of the average student admitted. A likely is a college that is very likely to admit you and where you are in the top 25% of applicants or higher. A target is a college where you are a competitive applicant and your profile is in the upper 50% of accepted applicants. So a college where students who are accepted have academic profiles that are similar to yours, GPAs, test scores, number of APs, things like that. To me, a college is a target if I estimate a student has a 50-50 chance of getting in. Note that even if you are a good candidate for your targets, you shouldn't count on getting into any given target college. A reach school can mean a few different things. Generally, I use it to refer to colleges where a student has a GPA and test scores that are slightly lower than the average admitted student, but similar students to them do get in. A reach can also be a college where academically you match the profiles of students there, but the college admits such a small percentage of students that they have to turn away even very qualified applicants. Colleges like the Ivies should be considered far reaches for pretty much everyone with very few exceptions. So if you have a well-balanced list of about 10 colleges, you should have 2 to 3 safety schools, 3 to 4 target schools, and 2 to 3 reach schools. I prefer to break this apart a little more. 1 to 2 true safeties, 1 to 2 likelies, 3 to 4 targets, 1 to 2 reaches, and 1 to 2 far reach colleges. If you Google or ask different people, you'll get slightly different versions of this, but the actual numbers matter less than the overall principles. You want at least 1 definite safety, somewhere where you are basically guaranteed admission, more than 1 if it's not guaranteed. You want to put most of your work towards target schools because that is most likely to pay off well for you in terms of acceptances. You do not want to weight your list heavily towards far reach colleges, especially if those are highly selective colleges. Let's see what this might look like for an imaginary student who has a 3.8 unweighted GPA, a 4.2 weighted GPA, lives in Southern California, and wants to go to a medium to large college on the West Coast. Their list might look like this. So I've color-coded this. UCLA and USC are far reach. UCI and UCSB are reach. UW and Santa Clara are target. Chapman and LMU are likely. And CSU Long Beach and CSU Fullerton are safety. So this list is pretty well balanced between far reach and safety. The percentages I've included are admissions rates. So in the most recent admission cycle, which was probably 2020 for this data, UCLA accepted 14% of applicants, USC accepted 12% of applicants, UCI 28%, etc. Keep in mind that with this list, there's definitely approximation going on, and also I considered factors in addition to the admissions rates. So for example, there are a few different reasons I put down the CSUs as safeties, even though from these numbers, it looks like they have very high selectivity. That's because actually their GPAs are a little bit lower, the average GPA, and also the CSUs have a referral program where if you qualify for a CSU, they'll refer you to a different one if you don't get into the one you apply to. But I don't have time to go over all of that in this video. So if you have any questions about any of the lists that I make, definitely feel free to ask in the comments. You'll also see that there's not that much difference in selectivity between LMU, UW, Santa Clara, and Chapman. LMU and UW have slightly higher average GPAs of admitted students. Basically, the exact number of colleges in each category matters less to me than the fact that the student has a solid number of targets, likelies, and safeties. Let's look at another example. Say I have a student from Seattle. I am from Seattle. With a 4.0 and 4.6 GPA, and they are open to staying in state but would prefer to go to California or the East Coast, and they are ideally looking for a smaller college. Their list might look something like this. Notice that even though the student has a very high GPA, I have put both Princeton and Dartmouth as far reach colleges because their admissions rates are so low that they very regularly turn away students with very high GPAs. Also note that this is not an exact science. Both Dartmouth and Amherst are very hard to get into. There's only a 4% difference in their admissions rates. For this list, I cut off the line between far reach and reach at about 10% admissions rate. But even if I bumped up Amherst into the far reach category or bumped down Dartmouth into the reach category, the overall principles stay the same. The list is balanced across different levels of selectivity. They have solid likelies and a solid safety, and the list isn't overly weighted towards far reaches. If you have those solid safeties and likelies and want to add a few more targets and reaches, then I think that's fine. If I personally were the student, I might do something like this, adding a few more far reach, reach, and target colleges. That is not in fact my former college list, but it is kind of the fantasy list I wish I'd had. Oops. It's a little long. What you're gonna wanna do is going to depend on your personality and your goals. I'm someone who likes to have a lot of options, is risk averse, and actually likes writing essays. So I might be someone who would want to have a kind of long list. A totally reasonable list for someone who is happy about the idea of staying in Washington State might look like this. For a list this short, I'd ask a student if they were truly happy with their likelies and safeties, and if that were true, they'd be saving themselves a lot of time and expense. Now, this is a list I would send back for revision. Like, fingers crossed, but I don't feel confident about this list at all. It's not that they couldn't get into any of their reach schools or their one target, but it's just like, I don't know. There's a substantial chance that the student is going to end up only getting into their safety, and since all their other colleges are on the East Coast, I am not confident with the idea that they are actually happy staying in Washington State. Okay, so we've looked at some lists. How do you make your own list? How do you figure out if a college is a reach, a target, a likely, etc.? Typically, you look at your GPA and test scores and compare them to the averages of students who get admitted to the colleges on your list. For years, this has been how people estimated the probability of getting into a given college. However, it has its flaws, and especially post-COVID, this is becoming a very imprecise measure. So keep in mind, everything is an approximation, and err on the side of caution. Test scores are becoming less important, and this also doesn't take into account the way that many colleges look at applications. Most selective colleges don't just look at your GPA, but also at your extracurriculars, your essays, your letters of rec, all sorts of things that go into the idea of holistic admissions that I can't really quantify in a YouTube video. When I work personally with a student, I can make a more well-educated guess at their likelihood of getting into a certain college because I know more about them and their background, but it's never an exact science. But okay, how do you make the best guess? Basically, you need to do a little bit of research to find the college's admissions data. If you have access to Naviance through your school, you can use that, or you can use lots of websites like College Board Big Future or Prep Scholar or tons of others. Basically, you just need to do a little research on colleges' admissions data and look at the stats for admitted students, so their GPAs, test scores, their class rank, whatever you can find. Usually, if you dig a little bit, you can actually find this on the college's website, which is obviously the best source for reliable information. In general, I would just make sure to check that the information that you do find is current and updated, and also cross-reference across a couple sources if you're not using the college's own website, just to make sure that it's accurate. Let me show you how I might look this up. A good place to start for basic facts about a college is College Board Big Future. Let's look at how an imaginary student might estimate their chances of getting into NYU. Say the student has a 3.7 unweighted GPA and an SAT score of 1400. Here, we can see basic information about NYU. If we want to know more about selectivity, we go to Applying. You can see their total applicants and admitted applicants. And below, you can see that the admit rate is around 16%, which they call most selective. Though, honestly, there are colleges that are more like 6%, and while NYU is quite difficult to get into, I would not say it's the most, but whatever. For more information on how likely our student is to get in, we can start with the Academics and GPA tab. If we scroll down, we can see that 72% have a GPA between 3.25 and 3.49, and 19% have one between 3.5 and 3.74. So this student's GPA is in the upper 25%, which would suggest it's a likely school. They are above average. However, I don't really like unweighted GPA as the only measure, since this doesn't take into account AP classes, and I know that colleges will look closely at the classes you take in addition to just the numbers. But that's all the information we can really get from here. Some colleges will include information on class rank, which can help, but it looks like they were not able to get that information for NYU. Let's look over at SAT and ACT scores. So this shows the SAT mid-range test scores, which, if we look at this highlight, shows the middle 50% of scores. So 25% of students scored above and 25% scored below this middle 50%. At 1400, this student is in the lower middle, which I would say makes NYU more of a reach target. It would be nice to have more information, and for some colleges you can get more, like class rank that was missing from the College Board site. You can always just Google NYU admissions data and see what you can find. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I check what you can find on the NYU website itself and then look at these various other sites. Many websites also have various kinds of calculators to estimate your chances of getting into a college. US News has a college admissions calculator feature that will show you a scattergram of the data we've just talked about. You want to uncheck all of these other data points so you can get a clearer picture of what's going on. I don't care who US News has registered as interested. So I've already entered the data for the student, and this isn't great. Students with this profile do get accepted, but they probably have something else going for them other than just their GPA and SAT scores, because the majority of students are over here. Based on my experience with NYU, I'm going to say this is a reach for this student. Exactly how much of a reach is going to depend on the rest of their application, starting with their coursework, since this is based on an unweighted GPA. For the absolutely most accurate data, you can look at something called the Common Data Set, which is where most of these websites draw their information from. The Common Data Set is basically a form where colleges compile all sorts of admissions data. For most colleges, you can actually find this pretty easily by Googling. So for example, you just Google Stanford Common Data Set and you'll be able to find a PDF document for the most recent year. Let's take a quick look at an example of a college's Common Data Set. So here's the Stanford 2020-2021 Common Data Set. We are interested in freshman admission, which it says is on page 7, which is on page 9 of the PDF. There's all kinds of interesting stuff here, but what I want to see right now is the freshman profile, which will give me the test scores, class rankings, and GPAs of enrolled freshman students. For test scores, we can see that 25% of students scored at or below 1420 on the SAT, and 25% scored at or above 1550, which is pretty high overall. You can also see similar information for the ACT. If we scroll down, we can find information about class rank. 96% of students were in the top 10th of their high school graduating class, though only about a quarter of high schools submitted that information. We can also see that 68.7% had an unweighted GPA of 4.0, and pretty much the rest of the class had a GPA between 3.75 and 3.99. The average GPA for accepted enrolled students was 3.96, which is very high, but that's to be expected at Stanford. The Common Data Set is a little more trouble to find and look at than websites that aggregate information, but it's nice to know that you're getting the actual numbers from the college itself. I don't usually tell students to look at the Common Data Set because if I'm working with a student, I basically do that for you. But if you can't afford a college counselor or you want to be empowered to find this information on your own, I just want you to know that that's where college counselors who are compiling this information get it from. Just some final thoughts. I've said this a number of times already, but I want to say this again. None of this is an exact science. I can give you general guidance about how to estimate how likely you are to get into a college, but there are so many elements that aren't easily quantifiable. This is part of why people choose to work with independent college counselors like me, because if I know you and I know your background, I can help you make a more accurately balanced college list. However, I know that that's not available to everyone, and you can do a lot more research on your own. Your high school counselor is a great resource because they have seen where a lot of students from your school have gotten into college. You can also attend college information sessions to find out what certain colleges might be looking for. You can talk to admitted students at the colleges that you're interested in to find out more about their backgrounds and achievements. I also want to emphasize that while people focus a lot on how hard it is to get into colleges, and that's a lot of what I talk about during this video, what's actually most important is that you're applying to colleges that you really want to go to. You want a college list where you would be happy to go to any college on it. I know that everyone will always have their favorites and their dream schools and just where they really want to go, but you really want to make sure that you are good with everything on the list. You want to make sure that all the colleges on your list have academic programs that you're looking for, are in locations that you would like to live in, and generally fulfill your requirements for what you are personally looking for in a college. So again, start with your college research first and continue researching as you finalize your list. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this video was helpful. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments below, and please like and subscribe to get future videos about the college admissions process.